Imagine you're standing outside a supermarket on an ordinary afternoon. A mother, with her happy, playful 3-year-old son riding in the shopping cart, walks toward her car after groceries. Suddenly a woman appears, silently, and attacks without warning. The little boy's scream echoes. In minutes his life ends. And just like that, a random act of evil shatters a family forever. What drove this woman? Why him? And how did this tragedy unfold so quickly in broad daylight at the doors of a familiar store? Let's go beyond the myths, into the slop of what really happened. The day that changed everything. It was early June 2024 in a quiet suburb of Cleveland, Ohio. The sun hung warm in the sky as 3-year-old Julian Wood and his mother Margot Wood finished shopping at the store, a branch of Giant Eagle in North Olmsted. The boy, full of energy and curious about everything, grinned as he sat in the front of the cart, pointing to cereal boxes, asking questions about dinosaurs. His mother smiled back, already thinking ahead to dinner, cart loaded with bags. They walked through the sliding doors, waved at the parking lot's familiar cars, the sun reflecting off windows. Everything seemed normal. At the same time, in the thrift store next door, a 34-year-old woman, Bianca Ellis, was inside and stole 2 kitchen knives. Investigators later found she had stolen them from the Volunteers of America thrift store adjacent to the Giant Eagle. Cuyahoga County prosecutors. Julian and his mother exited the store. Bags in hand. He laughed, reached for a candy bar display near the cart. She nodded, "Not today," and steered him toward the car. Then came the flash, the horror. Ellis followed them into the parking lot. Still unnoticed, she trailed behind as mother and son approached their vehicle. Julian sat in the cart near the rear of the car. Suddenly Ellis surged forward and stabbed the child, while he sat in the cart. She stabbed him multiple times. Julian's mother tried to pull him out, but she too was stabbed. Within minutes, horrific chaos, shouts, people rushing toward them, blood on the ground, a child in shock, a mother screaming. Julian was rushed to hospital, and later pronounced dead. His mother survived but was trauma-wounded. Cuyahoga County Prosecutor's Office. And just like that, a sunny afternoon turned into the worst nightmare you can imagine for any parent. The shock that froze a community. The parking lot of the Giant Eagle in North Olmsted was chaos. People screamed. Grocery bags spilled. Cars stopped mid-drive. Witnesses later told police they thought at first it was a fight between 2 strangers, until they saw the small body in the shopping cart. Margot Wood's scream was haunting. It echoed through the air as she clutched her little boy, begging him to stay awake. A good Samaritan ran forward and tried to help, pressing his shirt against Julian's wounds. Another bystander called 911, his voice shaking as he described what he saw. "A woman just stabbed a little kid, oh my God, she stabbed a kid." Police were already nearby and arrived within minutes. Officers found 3-year-old Julian unresponsive, his mother bleeding but conscious. She kept whispering, "Why? Why my baby?" over and over. The attacker, Bianca Ellis, didn't run. She dropped the knife and just stood there. When officers approached, she didn't resist. She said nothing, just stared blankly as they handcuffed her and took her away. The arrest. Inside the patrol car, Ellis sat silent. Police later revealed that she gave no clear motive. She didn't know the Woods. She hadn't spoken to them before the attack. Investigators said there was no sign of an argument, no words exchanged, nothing. It was a random, senseless act. At the North Olmsted police station, detectives tried to understand who she was. Ellis had a minor criminal history, some thefts, a few mental health evaluations, and reports of strange behavior around the area. But nothing that could have predicted this. Meanwhile, doctors at Fairview Hospital did everything they could to save Julian. But the injuries were too severe. Despite all efforts, he was pronounced dead shortly after arrival. News spread fast. Within hours, the community knew, a 3-year-old boy was gone because of a random stabbing outside a grocery store. People began leaving flowers and stuffed animals near the Giant Eagle entrance. Candles flickered under the store sign. Parents hugged their children tighter that night, thinking, that could have been us. And while the city mourned, investigators pieced together the timeline, from Ellis walking into the thrift store, stealing the knives, to the exact moment she approached the Woods. Surveillance footage showed her walking calmly, no hesitation, no signs of rage. That coldness sent chills through everyone who saw it. But the most disturbing question still remained, why did she do it? The police hoped her first court appearance would bring answers. But what they heard in that courtroom only deepened the horror. The courtroom shock. The courtroom in Cuyahoga County was packed. News cameras lined the back wall. Families from North Olmsted, still shaken by what had happened, filled every seat. Some came to support Margot Wood, others just came because they couldn't believe something so evil had happened in their quiet suburb. When deputies brought in Bianca Ellis, the room went silent. She wore a beige jail jumpsuit and stared blankly ahead. No tears, no fear, just emptiness. Margot Wood wasn't there that day. She was still recovering from her injuries, both physical and emotional. Her husband sat in the front row, eyes red from crying, holding a small photo of Julian in his hands. The judge entered. Everyone rose. Then the charges were read aloud. 1 count of aggravated murder, 1 count of attempted murder, 1 count of felonious assault, and 1 count of endangering children. Each word hit the courtroom like a hammer. Ellis showed no reaction. She didn't look at anyone, not the judge, not the prosecutor, not the cameras. Then, when the judge asked how she wished to plead, her voice broke the silence for the first time. "Not guilty," she said softly. A wave of disbelief swept through the room. Some gasped. One woman whispered, "How can she say that?" Others shook their heads in anger. The prosecutor then began to describe what happened that day, step by step. He told the court how Ellis had walked into the Volunteers of America thrift store, stolen 2 knives, and walked next door to the Giant Eagle. He showed surveillance clips of her standing behind Margot and Julian in line, calm, patient, almost as if waiting for the perfect moment. When the video played showing the attack outside, several people had to leave the courtroom. It was too much to watch. The prosecutor ended his statement with a chilling line. This wasn't a crime of passion. This was pure evil, a deliberate, unprovoked act against an innocent child. The defense attorney didn't argue that Julian had been killed, but instead hinted at something else, mental illness. He claimed Ellis had been deeply disturbed and that her actions were not driven by malice, but by a broken mind. The judge set the trial date. But before Ellis was escorted out, a reporter asked her a question. "Bianca, why did you do it?" She turned slightly, looked straight at the cameras, and said just 2 words. "God told me." The room fell dead silent. Even the deputies paused for a second. That single statement sent shockwaves across Ohio, and far beyond. Social media erupted. People demanded justice. Others questioned if she was mentally fit to stand trial. But as prosecutors would soon reveal, what they found inside her apartment after the arrest made everything even darker, and far more disturbing than anyone expected. The chilling discovery. When detectives entered Bianca Ellis's apartment, they expected to find chaos, maybe signs of struggle, drugs, or a mental breakdown. But what they found was even more unnerving. The place was spotless. Too spotless. No furniture overturned. No blood. No signs of drug use. Just order, cold, unsettling order. There were 2 knives missing from a kitchen set on the counter. Those were later matched to the ones stolen from the thrift store. A few groceries still sat neatly on the table, as if she'd planned to come home after the attack and cook dinner. But in the bedroom, officers made a discovery that changed the tone of the investigation. Pinned to the wall above her bed were handwritten notes, dozens of them. Each one filled with phrases like, "The world must be cleansed. They're watching me. Voices speak through the light." One note, written shakily in red ink, said, "The chosen one will fall, and the world will wake." Detectives realized these weren't just random scribbles. They looked like the thoughts of someone in a psychotic spiral, paranoid, detached from reality. On her phone, police also found internet searches from days before the murder, including "How to Silence Voices in My Head" and "God's Signs of Disobedience." When officers questioned neighbors, many described her as quiet but strange. One woman recalled Ellis walking up to her in the parking lot a few days before the murder, asking, "Do you ever hear God talk to you?" Another neighbor said she often stayed up all night, pacing her apartment and muttering to herself. The detective's notes reflected the same thought. Possible mental illness, delusional behavior, motive still unclear. Yet, one detail kept haunting investigators: Ellis had never been treated for mental illness. She wasn't on medication. She hadn't been institutionalized. Despite years of odd behavior, she'd slipped through every system meant to help people like her, and protect others from what could happen when their reality breaks apart. Meanwhile, Margot and her family were preparing for Julian's funeral. The community raised thousands of dollars to help. Hundreds gathered at a local church to say goodbye to a child who had barely begun to live. Tiny shoes sat on the altar beside a framed photo, Julian's bright smile frozen in time. As the funeral ended, a local pastor said something that echoed through the room. "Evil doesn't always wear a mask. Sometimes, it walks quietly among us." The investigation was now focused on one thing: could Ellis even stand trial? Psychiatrists were called in to evaluate her. And what they found inside her mind revealed just how close she had been to the edge, and how far she'd already fallen. Inside her mind. When forensic psychiatrists met with Bianca Ellis inside the Cuyahoga County Jail, they immediately knew something was off. She sat motionless, her eyes vacant, staring at a blank spot on the wall. When they asked her simple questions, her name, her age, the date, she answered softly, almost mechanically. But when the conversation turned to the day of the attack, her tone changed completely. She spoke in circles. Sometimes calm, sometimes trembling. At one point she whispered, "God said the child was the light. I had to stop the light before it burned the world." Those words chilled everyone in the room. Psychiatrists soon confirmed what many had already suspected: Ellis was suffering from severe schizophrenia, a mental disorder that causes hallucinations, delusions, and distorted reality. She wasn't just imagining voices, she believed she was obeying them. Still, the question of accountability hung heavy. Could someone so disconnected from reality truly be held responsible for their actions? Or should she be placed in a psychiatric hospital instead of prison? The prosecutor didn't hesitate, mental illness or not, she knew what she was doing, he argued. They pointed to the security footage, how Ellis calmly walked into the thrift store, stole 2 knives, then followed Margot and Julian into the Giant Eagle. There was planning. There was intent. It wasn't a random swing of madness, it was deliberate. The defense disagreed. Her attorney said Ellis had been hearing voices for weeks, believing she was chosen for a divine mission. He said she was so lost in her delusions that she didn't even understand that killing a child was wrong. The courtroom once again filled with tension. People whispered, angry and confused. For Julian's parents, none of it mattered, mental illness or not, their son was gone. During one of the evaluations, Ellis was asked if she remembered the moment of the stabbing. Her answer stunned even the doctors. "I remember light, a bright light around him. It told me he wasn't supposed to be here." Then she smiled faintly, like she believed she'd done something good. Outside the courthouse, protesters gathered holding signs. "Justice for Julian. Protect our children. No excuses for evil." Reporters asked the district attorney if they would seek the death penalty. His answer was direct. Yes. What happened to Julian was beyond comprehension. The state of Ohio will pursue justice to the fullest extent. And that decision, to pursue the death penalty, set off one of the most emotionally charged trials Ohio had seen in years. But as the trial began, something unexpected happened inside the courtroom, something that would shake even the toughest prosecutor on the case. The breakdown in court. The trial began on a gray Monday morning. Rain fell outside the Cuyahoga County Courthouse, matching the heavy mood inside. The public gallery was packed, reporters, grieving neighbors, and strangers who had followed the case for months all sat in silence, waiting for the moment that would finally bring answers. Bianca Ellis was led into the courtroom wearing a simple white blouse and gray slacks. Her hair was neatly braided, her face calm, her eyes distant. The woman accused of killing 3-year-old Julian Wood looked almost ordinary, and that, somehow, made it even harder to understand. Across the room, Margot Wood sat with her husband, clutching Julian's favorite stuffed toy, a small blue dinosaur. She didn't take her eyes off the defendant. When the judge gavelled in, the prosecutor stood and began with a single line. "This case is not about confusion. It's about choice." He then replayed the security footage again. The crowd watched in silence as Ellis trailed the young mother and her son through the aisles, pushing her cart, pretending to shop. Then, as they exited the store, she quickened her pace. The screen froze right before the attack. The prosecutor turned to the jury and said, "That right there is intent." She knew what she was doing. She stole the knives. She followed them. She chose to act. The defense attorney countered, asking the jury to look deeper, to see Ellis not as a monster, but as a broken mind. He read from her psychiatric report, describing years of untreated delusions, religious hallucinations, and isolation. He asked them to imagine a mind where the voice of God sounds as real as your own thoughts. As the testimony went on, tension built. Reporters scribbled notes. Every witness, every photo, every sound from that day played over and over in the minds of everyone present. Then came the moment no one expected. Ellis was asked to take the stand. The courtroom went silent. Her attorney hesitated, but she insisted. Slowly, she walked to the witness box, hands trembling. The prosecutor began, "Ms. Ellis, can you tell the court why you did what you did on June 3, 2024? She looked down. Then, almost whispering, said, "He was glowing. I thought he was the light. The voice said to stop the light before it burns us all." Gasps filled the room. Margot Wood broke down in tears. The judge called for order, but the damage was done. Those words would stay with everyone who heard them. Then suddenly, Ellis began to cry uncontrollably. For the first time since her arrest, her emotion broke through. She rocked back and forth, sobbing, shouting, "I didn't mean to. I didn't mean to." The voice wouldn't stop. Deputies rushed to restrain her as the courtroom descended into chaos. The judge cleared the room while Ellis screamed, "I just wanted peace." For a few long minutes, everyone was shaken, even the jurors. What they had just witnessed wasn't calculated, it was raw, tragic, and terrifying. After that day, the question of her sanity became the center of everything. The trial paused for a new psychiatric evaluation. Was she truly insane, or just trying to avoid punishment? That decision would soon determine her fate, and whether justice for Julian would come from a prison cell or a psychiatric ward. But before the verdict was reached, something unexpected happened, an event that would change the course of the entire case. The verdict twist. Weeks turned into months as the court waited for the new psychiatric evaluation of Bianca Ellis. The public grew restless. News stations across Ohio replayed the story night after night, each headline echoing the same haunting question. Was she mentally ill, or purely evil? When the trial finally resumed, the tension was unbearable. The jury had been selected again. Reporters crowded every seat. Outside the courthouse, protesters held up signs demanding justice for Julian Wood. Inside, Margot Wood sat quietly, holding her husband's hand, her face pale but steady. Then came the expert testimony, the psychiatrist's final report. The lead doctor, Dr. Amanda Green, took the stand and spoke slowly, clearly, every word heavy with consequence. "It's my professional opinion," she said, "that Ms. Ellis suffers from chronic schizophrenia." However, the room leaned forward. She was aware her actions would cause harm. She knew she was using a deadly weapon. She may have believed she was obeying a divine voice, but she understood that what she was doing was against the law. Those few sentences changed everything. The prosecution smiled faintly. The defense attorney lowered his head. The judge turned to the jury and explained that under Ohio law, not guilty by reason of insanity requires that the defendant did not understand right from wrong. The report had just confirmed, she did. After 5 hours of deliberation, the jury filed back into the courtroom. Everyone held their breath. The foreperson stood, holding the paper that would decide everything. On the charge of aggravated murder, we find the defendant, Bianca Ellis, guilty. Gasps erupted. Some people cried. Others clapped quietly through tears. Margot Wood closed her eyes and whispered, "Thank you." But the trial wasn't over. The jury had another decision to make, whether to recommend the death penalty or life in prison without parole. For days, emotional testimonies filled the courtroom. Teachers spoke about Julian, how curious and kind he was. Family friends described his laughter, his love for dinosaurs, and how he called his mom Mama Goose. When it was time for sentencing, even the judge's voice wavered slightly. "The tragedy that occurred is beyond words," he said. "But our justice system must rise above vengeance." Then came the twist no one expected. Despite the prosecution's push for death, the jury recommended life in prison without parole. The decision stunned many. Some saw it as compassion, others saw it as injustice. But when asked why, one juror later said, "I saw a sick woman, not a monster. Death wouldn't bring Julian back. But life in a cell, that's justice enough." As deputies led Ellis away, she turned once toward the courtroom, her face blank again, and whispered something no one could hear clearly. Some thought she said, "I'm sorry." Others swore it sounded like, "He's safe now." The case was over. But the ripples of that moment would continue to haunt North Olmsted for years. Yet even after the sentencing, a strange new revelation emerged, one that left investigators questioning whether Ellis had acted entirely alone. The hidden connection. Just when everyone thought the case was over, new information surfaced, something investigators hadn't noticed during the initial chaos of the trial. It started with a quiet phone call from a social worker who had once handled a welfare check involving Bianca Ellis 2 years before the stabbing. The social worker's voice was uneasy. "There's something you should see," she told detectives. She handed over a file, old, worn, and mostly forgotten. Inside were records of Ellis's repeated attempts to get mental health treatment, only to be turned away due to lack of insurance or hospital overcrowding. But that wasn't the shocking part. Tucked inside the file was a police incident report from 2022, showing that Ellis had been detained briefly for wandering outside another Giant Eagle supermarket, muttering about evil lights and children chosen by God. She wasn't arrested, just taken to a hospital for observation and released a few days later. The officer who'd handled that call had written a chilling note. Patient claims voices tell her to watch for the glowing child. No sign of drugs or alcohol. 2 years before Julian's death, the warning signs were already there. The revelation hit the public hard. People began asking, how could the system have missed this? How many red flags were ignored before tragedy struck? Investigators found that Ellis had reached out to community programs for help more than a dozen times. Each time, the same response: "We're full, call next week, try a private clinic." She slipped through every gap in the mental health system, until it was too late. When Margot Wood learned about it, she didn't speak for hours. Eventually, she released a statement through her lawyer. "I will never forgive what happened. But I hope this shows how many lives can be saved if we take mental illness seriously, before it turns into tragedy." Her words spread online. People across Ohio shared them with hashtags like #JusticeForJulian and #FixTheSystem. The story became a turning point in local conversations about mental health, violence, and prevention. In the months that followed, lawmakers proposed a new bill, Julian's Law, aiming to provide emergency psychiatric evaluations for anyone flagged by police as a danger to themselves or others. The law would later pass, marking a small but powerful step forward. As for Bianca Ellis, she was transferred to the Ohio Reformatory for Women, placed under constant psychiatric observation. Guards said she rarely spoke, spending most of her days sitting silently, staring at the wall. Sometimes, they said, she would hum softly, a tune no one recognized, before whispering, "The light is gone now. The world is quiet." And though justice had been served, the wound left by that June afternoon outside Giant Eagle never truly healed. A mother lost her only child. A community lost its sense of safety. And a nation was forced to face a painful truth, that sometimes, evil isn't born from hate, but from neglect, silence, and the failure to care for those who are crying out long before they break. Julian's name would live on, not just as a memory, but as a warning. The lesson from the Giant Eagle tragedy. The Giant Eagle tragedy was not just another headline, it was a moment that broke hearts across America. A little boy, Julian Wood, just 3 years old, was doing what every child loves, going grocery shopping with his mom. In seconds, that everyday joy turned into unimaginable pain. Julian's story forces us to look beyond the crime, beyond the blood, beyond the courtroom, and into the cracks of a system that failed everyone. Because the truth is, this didn't have to happen. Bianca Ellis had been showing signs of mental illness for years: voices, paranoia, breakdowns. The system saw it. The system documented it. But no one acted. No hospital had space. No one followed up. And that inaction cost a child his life. For Margot Wood, every day since that afternoon outside Giant Eagle has been a battle, to heal, to breathe, to keep going. She said that she will never stop fighting to make sure no other mother ever goes through what she did. And that fight gave birth to something powerful, Julian's Law, a step toward early intervention and real mental health reform in Ohio. Julian's name now stands for something greater than tragedy, it stands for change. It's easy to look at Bianca Ellis and see only evil. But this story reminds us that evil doesn't always appear in a mask or shadow. Sometimes it wears confusion. Sometimes it's the result of neglect. Sometimes, it's a warning ignored too many times. What happened outside that store wasn't just the act of one woman, it was the echo of a system that looked away when it should have reached out. And while justice was served in the courtroom, true justice will only come when we learn from this, when we make sure no more Julians are lost to preventable pain. So tonight, as we close this story, remember the name Julian Wood, not just as a victim, but as a symbol. A reminder that behind every headline, there's a lesson. Behind every tragedy, a chance to do better. Because real evil thrives in silence, and the only way to stop it is to listen, before it's too late.